You are listening to the Herald's politics podcast, Unspun Live, with me, political correspondent Hannah Brown. We're recording this episode on July the 8th, so we are well and truly into summer recess at the Scottish Parliament. For those who are just listening, I'm wearing my summer shirt. I'm very much embracing the fact that Parliament isn't sitting at the moment, but that doesn't mean the fun stops there, because we've got a really fun show for you today, or episode for you today. We've got leading political comedian Matt Forde joining us. We discuss Matt's array of guests. He's got a great lineup at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, including loads of prominent political figures in Scottish politics. We also try our hand at the best impersonations we can do of political figures in Scotland. I think it's fair to say that Matt very much won that one. But yeah, enough of me. Let's hear from the man himself.
Matt Forde, thank you so much for joining us on the Herald's Unspun Live Politics podcast.
Pleasure to be here.
You've got an exciting few weeks coming up. You're going to be at the Edinburgh Fringe for a whole host of shows, aren't you, Matt? You've got your political party shows, and then you've also got your Defying Calamity, is it, show that you're doing?
That's correct, yeah, my stand-up show that my new one that I'm bringing to the Edinburgh Festival, and as you say, the podcast recordings, and it's just always the most exciting time of the year. I love Edinburgh as a city. I love the festival. I love being a part of it. I never take a year off. You know, I just think it's the most magical place and such a great place to be a comedian. So as soon as summer, you know, once you start getting into May and June, the butterflies begin, because you know that Edinburgh's not far away.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair whack that you've got going on as well. It's not just the one show. You've got this whole host of shows that are taking place with all these political figures. We've got, I think, Joanna Cherry, Ian Murray's going to be there, Sadiq Khan, Kirsty Ward. Can you talk me through why you decided on these particular guests?
Well, I always like to get a mix. I think it's really good while I'm in Edinburgh, because usually I record the shows in London, and obviously politicians from all over the country are in London, so it's a good way, an easy way to get a kind of diverse range of voices. But whenever I'm in Scotland, I think it's good to have Scottish guests on, but mix it up a little bit. And Kirsty Walker I'd asked a few years ago when she was still on Newsnight, and I just think she is such an exceptional broadcaster and talent, and really rare. And I always like to, I love talking to politicians, but I think it's also fascinating to talk to people who've covered politics in a particular way for a number of years. I'm delighted to have her on this year. With Joanna, I was trying to get a political mix. You know, I don't want it to just all be Labour or all be SNP. Obviously, Joanna is in a particular place with her relationship with the SNP at the moment, which makes her fascinating. She's also one of the most compelling guests I've ever interviewed. So she's talented, she's sharp, she's obviously on the different side of a number of the debates to some of the her friends in the SNP. So that made her really interesting, particularly with the Supreme Court judgment.
Does it, when you look at someone that's a rebel, as you know, Joanna is often referred to as, does it always make for much more of an interesting guest when you get those kind of more outspoken voices on to chat politics with you?
I think whenever you've got someone who's prepared to kind of, obviously when people are towing the line, in a way it's a different type of interview, because in that regard, you know what they're going to say. But there is something fascinating hearing from people who are taking the decisions. So I think they're kind of just different types of interview. Whereas, as you say, when you've got someone who's a bit more rebellious, or who is on a different side of a particular debate within a movement, I just think it's so much more interesting, because I think it's really refreshing for the public to hear differing voices from within political parties and movements, particularly on issues like the ones that Joanna has effectively been a rebel on. Because actually, I think there are different types of rebellion, and there are people who are rebels by design. You know, someone like Jeremy Corbyn's just always going to rebel. That's just who he is. That's part of his DNA. I don't think it necessarily is what Joanna is. And I think she is someone who's probably been, and I can't speak for her, but my assessment is that she's someone who is in tune with public opinion on a whole range of social issues, and has found it really difficult to be part of a party and a movement that has gone down a particular route. So that makes her really interesting, because I think had things been different, she wouldn't have been a rebel. Now, obviously, that is fairly obvious, but she's mainstream, really. So she's not a fringe politician whose rebellion is part of who she is. I think she's been driven to it, and I think that is an interesting perspective. Yeah, and she's, always just such a great talker.
I mean, obviously that Supreme Court judgment will be one that you'll likely bring up. Are there any other kind of issues that you want to discuss with Joanna? I mean, one that's kind of weighing over the heads of Scottish politics at the moment is obviously what's happening with the SNP. John Swinney's leadership following Nicola Sturgeon, Humza Yousaf, all of that. Will that be a kind of point of, I guess, that you want to bring up with her, the whole kind of current SNP leadership?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, especially as, for a lot of people, she is the sort of best leader they never had. There's a whole load of people in the Yes movement who would love to see Joanna Cherry as the leader of it, and who she probably more closely aligns with in terms of a lot of her values. So her assessment of the current SNP government and how it's doing and what its prospects are, absolutely are high on the list. And obviously we know how she feels about Nicola Sturgeon and John Swinney. So yeah, I will definitely be asking her about that.
Before we turn to your other guests, Matt, I mean, have you been perfecting any of your Scottish political impersonations before you head to the show? Have you got your John Swinney down to a T yet, or what's your...
I wouldn't say I've got it down to a T. I would say my John Swinney is basically fine. I would say my Anas is a kind of cartoony, squeaky mix of the sort of that beautiful accent he's got, which is a mix of the Scottish Pakistan accent that makes him very. He's a great, he would be a great spitting image puppet, Anas, because he's got a voice that you can really have fun with.
A very Glasgow accent as well, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So those two are kind of, I mean, I always like to chuck in Gordon Brown as well. It's kind of nice to have a couple of others to kind of play with. So my Swinney is fine. I think my Anas is better, but I may have to fall back on some golden oldies from time to time.
Can we have a wee flavour of what they sound like?
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot this was a podcast. Yeah, so with Anas, obviously John is a lot more softly spoken like that. In fact, Jim Murphy was a wee bit like that. A lovely sort of whispery way about him. Whereas Anas is, I do him no. Now is not the time, which, I'm sort of dialing up the squeakiness of him. But I think sometimes you have to caricature a little bit. You have to exaggerate it a little bit to kind of get the vibe.
Yeah, I think one of the most fun words that I always have with political figures in Scotland is actually the word Scotland. It's the way in which they pronounce the T and the L in the middle to be like Scotland. And I think Anas does that a wee bit. And you had it a wee bit with Nicola Sturgeon as well. That whole Scotland. I can't do it.
Oh, that's really good. I hadn't noticed that. I mean, when Stephen Flynn says it, he really rocks on his heels as he says it. He really,
You've got to say it with conviction if you're an SNP politician.
Yeah, with SNP politician, they will really underline it, and it's Scotland that leads the way. They will really hammer the word home, which I quite like. It is about picking up on those. I mean, obviously, there are certain phrases that, the one that John Swinney uses, that a lot of his predecessors uses, I want to be First Minister for all of Scotland, not just those who voted for independence, but those who are not yet convinced. That is one of the worst things you could say. For people who believe that the party is arrogant, that does nothing to dispel that. The idea that you just don't know your own mind yet, and you will be persuaded by the inevitability of our case. If I was them, I'd just stop saying it. I mean, I know it makes them feel good, but I think to everyone else, it just sounds mad.
And so someone else that you're going to be grilling here is Ian Murray. Obviously, Secretary of State for Scotland. We might have, I think, our kind of impersonation or impression of Ian Murray since he's taken on this role is he's kind of taken a wee bit of a step back from the media. You can't get as much kind of insight and interest out of him because he is in this very important role for Scotland. I mean, are you hoping to get a wee bit more of the Ian Murray personal side out of him whilst you're interviewing him? What's going to be the take with him?
Oh, definitely. And he's a really good laugh, Ian Murray. So I think we'll have. I think I'll sort of coax him out a bit. But he, as you say, he's in a really interesting position because he's kind of got a foot in both camps. He's Scottish Labour. He's obviously the Secretary of State for Scotland, but that power base for him it's at a UK level. He's a member of the UK cabinet, and the change in his fortunes from being the only Labour MP in Scotland to all of a sudden being Secretary of State for it. So he kind of, more than any other member of that cabinet, is tied to Scottish Labour in a way that none of the others are. So he's a bit of, I think he is, if you want to understand the strengths and weaknesses of devolution, he is the man to talk to because devolution obviously allows you to diverge, and it's important. That's the whole point. But when you've got the same party in charge in, say, Holyrood and a UK level, that creates all sorts of problems. So if Labour do win, you've then got a kind of joint narrative that is different. And managing that takes real skill and elegance. So getting a sense of how he has found that first year of trying to manage what Labour needs to do to win in Scotland without effectively trashing what Labour are doing at a UK level. How do you basically align yourself enough, but give yourself the wiggle room to be distinct? And I think that is something that so many parties have really struggled with, but none more than Labour.
And it's a real tightrope when issues like the winter fuel payment come up, Scottish Labour taking one line, UK Labour taking another. Must be very difficult for him to walk that.
It must be. And I just think part of the problem is, I think we have to be able to have these difficult discussions as a country. And all these things have to be, or ideally they would be rooted in political reality, is that giving money to people who don't need it surely is a bad idea. And yet we have all these things where, because they become effectively totemic and because certain parties don't want to be painted as heartless or basically accused of being a Tory is the worst thing in Scottish politics. You can't be seen as being a Tory. Therefore, we can't take any of these difficult decisions. Well, then nothing really changes and you don't rebalance the economy in the way that you want to. You don't redistribute wealth and opportunity in the way that Labour should want to. And I think that is... I imagine that is something that of all the people around that cabinet table, Ian Murray will particularly appreciate.
I mean, we're speaking about rebels. We spoke about Joanna Cherry, who's obviously going to be one of your guests. Like, we had Brian Leishman, who's kind of seen as yet another rebel on the podcast, I think a week ago now. Even he was saying that welfare reforms need to happen. So there are voices of rebellions who say, we need this, we want to do it differently from UK Labour, but they're still, to an extent, towing the party line and towing this idea of what we need to see happen, which is the change around welfare reform, which is dead interesting. Another guest that you're obviously getting on the show is Sadiq Khan. Mayor, what can we expect from him?
I think it's really cool to bring guests to the festival that you might not sort of see the rest of the year. And I always like to have big Scottish guests while I'm in Edinburgh, but I think it is cool as well to have someone from elsewhere. And I think his perspective is really interesting because he's got his own mandate. He's in his third term. This is someone who for a while was the most powerful Labour politician in the UK. And the lessons of his leadership and the things that he's got right and the things that maybe he would have done differently are obviously really instructive for Labour right now. And of all the years he's been Mayor of London, only one of those years has been under a Labour government. So it'd be interesting to get his take on the change for him. And also, obviously in Scotland, devolution is always a sort of ever-present discussion. So just understanding what you can do with powers and what extra powers you need and where it's important to devolve power and where it's in. Because actually, obviously in Scotland the discussion is at a national level. It's not really been to a great extent about devolving power out of Holyrood across Scotland. Like that hasn't really been a big deal. So that is something that's an interesting thing about how you get not just powers up to Scotland, but out of Holyrood and out to local authorities. So that may be tedious to some people. To me, I worked in local government. I find it really interesting. And also just his, he obviously has a unique perspective because he is a powerful Labour politician who's very loyal to the Labour Party, but he is not in the cabinet. He sits outside of that. So again, you're talking to someone who's not bound by the collective responsibility of the government. He's loyal to the party, but that obviously gives him a distinct perspective. And he's highly experienced. I think it's sort of all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, he's been around for ages. And he still feels like quite a young, fresh politician, maybe because a lot of the others are so much older, but he has been around a while and he's got a real depth of experience now. And he's a really funny bloke. I've interviewed him a couple of times and he's always great fun. I think that's part of it as well, is it is a chat show as well as wanting to get all the political stuff. You also want to have fun with someone and he is always great value.
He'll bring the energy. And that's dead interesting what you were saying about Scotland and devolution and the mayor kind of set up in England down south. I mean, we know that Anna Sarwar always uses Andy Burnham as his almost poster boy for how great it could be here if we had an Andy Burnham. So yeah, definitely be quite keen and interested to hear what Sadiq Khan maybe has to say in terms of mayoral roles and how that could play in terms of if it was introduced in Scotland.
Definitely, because I think where you have mayors, you definitely have more accountability. People know who is in charge, and that really can only be a good thing. And in local authorities, I mean, I worked in Stoke-on-Trent. You had such low turnout that you could become a councillor on a couple of hundred votes, and then if you can become leader of that group, you could end up running a council with a budget of millions and millions of pounds, and only 200 or 300 people in that city would have voted for you. I just think that's mad. And you get lots of people in areas where you've got, I guarantee it, in areas where you have a mayor, more people know who's in charge. When you've got the old leader model, just less people are aware of who runs the city. And there's less accountability. Whereas with mayors, it brings that level of accountability. And a lot of them obviously are at a more strategic level where you've got regional mayors who can pull together all these things. And you do need to work across geographic boundaries in order to sometimes get big employers into an area, or for transport solutions and things, because it's not just like train lines only run through one local authority. They cross boundaries. You need powerful people who can bring all these things together. So I think I'm a real advocate for them.
It's good to see that you're going to get a broad range of voices on representing different areas of thought.
Well, that's it. You want voices from all sides of all debates, really. And I'm really keen on that, because I think whatever my personal views are, you have to be able to listen to other views. And actually, I find it more interesting to hear from people that I disagree with, because I know what I think. So just talking to someone that if I only ever interview people I agreed with on everything all the time, I'd be bored stiff. So I think it's good to talk to people who have different perspectives, who are hopefully being reasonable and thoughtful about how they express themselves. And I think it is interesting that, even on sort of progressive wings of parties, you do have this spectrum of opinion on a whole range of social issues that I think these things have to be talked about, and that they have to be talked about openly and in public and thoughtfully.
It's fair to say, Matt, you were a fairly Labour man. You used to work for Party HQ. You were very actively involved in the Labour Party, even in your university days. I mean, what made you shift from being so involved with the Labour Party to then taking on political comedy?
I'd always done comedy on the side as a hobby, and just had never. I think I did my first gig when I was 16 in Nottingham, and just always loved it. But I was never doing political stuff. And then I worked for the party for a while, and that, as you can imagine, it just took up all my time. So I stopped doing comedy for a bit, but I always loved it. And then I was working for Labour towards the end of the last Labour government, the sort of Blair Brown handover time, and obviously that was a difficult time to be working for the party. And I was in my 20s, and I was exhausted, and I wanted a bit of a change. So I thought I'm going to give comedy a go, because I felt like I needed to have a proper crack at it. I felt like really that's what I wanted to do in my life. So I was very lucky that I was able to move to London and really make a go of it. And I do prefer it. I think it's so much fun getting to create shows about everything that's going on and being able to impersonate people and take the mick out of it all. I will always remain a political obsessive. I think it's an amazing world. And the reason I like it is you can really change people's lives for the better. And I really believe that most people in it, from all parties, really just want things to be better for people. I think politicians are really rare individuals who are prepared to endure so much defeat and so much setback, and their stamina is remarkable, and they can achieve so many great things. Obviously, we don't always get the politicians that I would like, but I really respect it. So even though I take the mick out of it and I tease them and I lambast them and whatever else, it really underneath that is because I care. So I just have more fun now. I just think I've got so much more freedom, and it's just it's silly and it's showing off. That's basically, I'm a show off. So that is, I think, the fundamental reason why I've ended up doing this is really it's where my talents lie, and I think you have to be honest about your own limitations. I don't think I was really fully cut out for politics. I think you have to make a lot of personal sacrifice, and I don't have that level of stamina. I can't withstand that, and I really admire the people that do.
And I guess also it helped when, Boris Johnson was in power. There was a time of Partygate where you would look at certain things that were in the news and you just think this is taken straight out of something like the thick of it. And it gave ample kind of grounds for political comedy to arise, almost to the point that you didn't really need to write the script. You were just reporting on the news at that point.
Oh, definitely what was the positive, even though it drove me mad as a citizen, the benefit of that period was that people were so engaged and they were so kind of upset, but they knew everything that was going on. Really from kind of, I was going to say Brexit onwards, but I think from 2014 onwards, I think from the Scottish independence referendum onwards, there was a real, people just couldn't ignore politics. These were just such big things that were happening, for better or for worse, that people were more aware of the individuals involved and what was going on. And from a political comedian's point of view, that was great because I didn't have to lay the groundwork. I didn't have to explain who people were. People immediately knew who these people were. They knew how they felt about them. They understood the jokes that I was making about them. So it was a huge benefit. Personally, I would rather live through calmer political times because I find it really stressful to live in divisive times where the country is in a bad way. But for political comedy, I think they are the conditions often in which it thrives. So I'm not entirely saying it's a price worth paying, but yes, it was certainly easier to do the job in those years.
I guess just kind of looking onto your own kind of personal journey in recent years. I mean, you've got this show that's also coming out during the Fringe, Defying Calamity. Reading a wee bit of the blurb on that, it gives me an idea that I guess you want to focus on a personal journey that you've had. You recently had, I think a couple of years ago now, Matt, please correct me if I'm wrong, a cancer diagnosis which completely altered your life. I mean, yeah, just explain that to us a wee bit and how you came up with this Defying Calamity show.
Yeah, I had cancer a couple of years ago. I was diagnosed at the Edinburgh Festival while I was performing up there. I had terrible nerve pain in my leg and I couldn't move. Went to see a GP, and I think they realized, went to see a doctor, and I think they realized that it was quite serious. So they got me an MRI, and then that revealed a tumor on the base of my spine that had pressed the nerve. So that was obviously terrifying. And at that point, you don't know how long you've got left. You don't know what your future is going to be like. And it was clear, obviously, because it was on the spine and wasn't in soft tissue, I knew that any surgery was going to have consequences for me. And I was really worried about my future. But also, it forced me to come to terms with my mortality, which is something that I will always be really grateful for, because I now know how I will feel. I mean, obviously, you never know when you're going to die. I could get hit by a bus later today. So, it's not like other people wouldn't have died in the intervening years. But when you are forced to come to terms with it, there is a real, or certainly I found, something very peaceful about it. And in a way, I don't think that will ever leave me. That I always feel, actually, that whatever else is going on, I've been through the worst thing I will ever go through, I hope. I am fine with my time being up whenever that time comes. And obviously I want to live as long as possible, but I think that gives you like a real freedom psychologically in a really nice way. So even though I am sort of frustrated at the state of politics and the state of the world, I still feel really good about life. I just think being alive, and I realize that's from a position of relative privilege. I realize I'm not living on the eastern border of Ukraine or in Gaza, but I still feel that even in dark times, really you're being alive is a mad gift, and the people that come into your life that you really care about really are the things that matter. And I think that is something that just having that really, I kind of knew that anyway, but when you're forced to really conclude that and really figure that out, I think that I feel so lucky that I had that experience. I just feel like it's only been positive for me, even though I went through it a bit. Yeah, so there is even in the despair of the state of politics, there is an optimism that comes from that experience that and my body has changed. I've got ailments now that I think are funny to talk about. So I've got a stoma, and I'm incontinent. I've got erectile dysfunction, and you think, well, these surely are all classic subjects for comedy, as alongside the political stuff.
I'm definitely glad you can see the light and the funniness in all of that as well. I mean, even coming back to that, it's so interesting that you're taking such a positive outlook on it, because one of our columnists at the Herald, Brian Taylor, broadcasting pro, former BBC Scotland political editor, he calls this time the age of anxiety for Scots and beyond. So I think something positive like this is quite refreshing. You've called the show Defying Calamity. Who's defying the calamity, do you think?
Good point. I feel like I did by staying alive. And I feel like in a way it's about how we can collectively defy it by, I guess in a way, it's sort of about how Labour has to find a way to defy it. Because I still think they're the best hope we've got to sort our problems out, really, as a country. We're in a real mess. And I think having people in charge who will sort out the NHS, who will grow the economy, who will build nuclear power stations that will make us more, energy self-sufficient, and all those things. Really, really, they are the sort of best bet. So they've got to, they've got to improve for all of our sakes. So it's about that as well. But I also just think that politics is really important, and it has the power to transform people's lives. It will determine how long we live and how educated we are and all those things. But equally, and in a way, this is almost like a contradictory truth, life is about more than politics. And I think really you have to try and liberate yourself from it a bit and find joy in life outside of it, and in your personal relationships and just in your relationship with yourself. And in a way, without sounding like a hippie, just your relationship just with like the planet and the joy you can find in every day, because that really, politics is just so stressful. So you have to find sometimes your reassurance elsewhere.
And you were talking about UK Labour, but will we see any sort of hints for SNP, their governance in the future? For Swinney, you mentioned the NHS there for UK Labour, but the NHS in Scotland is a huge issue that's weighing over John Swinney at the moment, whether or not he delivers on reducing waiting times, getting down. A lot of issues with the NHS. That's going to be a huge factor as to how he will, I guess, succeed in leadership. Is that going to be kind of mentioned at all? Any kind of Scottish things in your show?
Oh, there's always a good SNP segment, and they are, they basically just managers of the status quo. So much of the public sector in Scotland has remained unreformed because they've got one idea that the Scottish people have not allowed them to enact, and they are sort of immensely frustrated by that. But they've, all the years they've had, 18 years, really, they merged Police Scotland, and that's been it. There's been no huge, and obviously they're never going to copy what England does. But you look at what the Tories did, what New Labour did with academies, and what the Tories did with free schools. John Swinney's never going to do anything like that. They're never going to look at creative solutions for the public sector. And I think, sadly, they are part of a culture that avoids difficult truths, that just thinks, they're kind of old Labour that just chuck money at it and hope that it makes a difference, because they don't want to tackle vested interests whether it's trade unions or whoever, in reforming large elements of the public sector, because they're trying to keep, all that coalition on side. They're so reliant on elements of the charity sector. The cultural capture of the SNP of certain elements of Scottish civil and civic society means that they don't want to disrupt those people. So they just funnel cash towards them. And that's it. And you think, well, you've had all this, the benefit from extra per head funding and really, and for what? What have they got to show for it? Had they, the stuff they could have achieved in those years, the difference they could have made on drug deaths, on the NHS, on education, their record could be incredible. And it's not. And I just think that's mad to have not said, why don't we run Scotland really well? Let's use the benefit that we get as being members of the UK, even though we're intellectually against it. We get a good financial settlement out of it. Let's use it. Let's be creative. And they haven't. And I just think that's balmy, because they claim, I have an issue with other parties like this as well. Would people who are patriotic really have run the country in this way? Is this, it was the same with the Tories at a UK level. They wrapped themselves in the Union Jack. And what good did it do us? Look around the place, at the streets, at our public services, at the economy. This is not the legacy of patriots. If anything, this is the legacy of people who aren't that keen on the place. So I think the same goes for the SNP. If they really loved Scotland, they'd run it better.
I guess the argument that they'll always have is, that they're always held back by Westminster. They're devolving. They need more powers. That's the argument. They time and time again come to us journalists with complete frustration from our end, that it's always someone else's fault.
Of course, and I think, as long as you've got devolution, that will always be the way, that any, and it's the same at a UK level, with Brexit or the European Court of Human Rights. The SNP aren't the only offenders when it comes to making that argument. Oh, if only this other group of people stopped interfering. You think, well, you've still got a whole range of powers and a whole load of money that you could have done different things with, and you chose not to. And they are still responsible for that. And it's just a shame, because this affects people's lives. This affects how long we live, what we can do with our lives. You're holding people back. And that's been, I think, there's been the real frustration, I think, of really the last few years of successive governments of various parties, is all this mess has held us back. And that's people's lives. That's stuff they can't do. That's holidays they can't have, careers they won't have, relatives they won't have, that died early. This is as big as it gets. That's why I despair. Because I just think, oh man, we have been cursed. Equally, good stuff still happens. There are still amazing people that defy these things, that work, within systems to make them work as best as possible. There are still wonderful teachers and doctors and nurses that exceed their circumstances in delivering for people. So that gives me hope.
And your show is all about hope, which people can obviously go and see at the Fringe. Do you want to give a wee plug for it at all, Matt, there?
Yes, Defying Calamity at the Pleasance Courtyard, 8 p.m. every night.
Great stuff. Well, thank you so much for joining us on Unspun Live with the Herald. Matt Forde, everyone.
Cheers, Hannah. Thank you.
That's all we have time for on Unspun Live. Tune in next week, and of course, remember to subscribe.